Ketchup sits on almost every table in America. More than 97% of American households keep it in the fridge. It's the best-selling condiment in the United States, outselling mayonnaise, mustard, and barbecue sauce combined. You know its taste by heart. Sweet, tangy, with a sharp tomato bite. You probably assume you know what it's made of. Tomatoes, sugar, vinegar, and that's it. But the word ketchup existed for at least 100 years before a single tomato ever went into it. And when that word was first spoken, it meant something entirely different. A fermented fish sauce, dark, salty, sharp-smelling, a product you almost certainly wouldn't recognize today. Today we'll trace the full journey of ketchup, from fishing boats in Southeast Asia to the bottle in your fridge. And it's a longer, stranger, and far better documented story than most people have ever heard. Let's start with the word. Linguists and food historians trace the origin of ketchup to dialects of southern China and to the coastal regions of Southeast Asia, where words like ketchup or koechiap in Hokkien referred to a brine or sauce made from fermented fish. This isn't marketing legend, it's the etymology accepted by serious dictionaries, including the Oxford English Dictionary, which records the word as borrowed from these languages through trade contact in Southeast Asia. This fish brine, the ancestor of what the Vietnamese today call nuoc mam and of the Thai call nam pla, had already been a staple of the region's cuisine for centuries by that point. Fish, mostly small varieties like anchovies, was mixed with large amounts of salt and left to ferment for months. The result? A dark, intensely salty liquid rich in fatty acids, with a sharp, deep flavor we'd now call umami, though that word didn't yet exist in any European language. This sauce bore no resemblance to modern ketchup in texture, taste, or color, but it was the first to carry the name that would eventually become one of the most recognizable words in the global food industry. In the 17th and 18th centuries, British and Dutch trading companies were active throughout the ports of Southeast Asia. Sailors and merchants brought home more than spices. They brought home new flavors, and the word ketchup arrived in England exactly that way. As the name of an exotic sauce people tried to recreate without the original ingredients. Here's the key detail rarely explained. The English didn't bring back the recipe. They brought back the word and a general idea of a rich, salty, fermented sauce, and then started making their own versions out of whatever they had at home. The earliest printed English ketchup recipes, dating to the early 18th century and recorded in cookbooks of the period, contain no tomato whatsoever. Instead, they're typically based on mushrooms, walnuts, or, crucially, anchovies and other small fish, fermented or boiled down with salt, spices, and vinegar into a thick, dark, pungent sauce. English cookery writer Eliza Smith, in her 1727 book The Complete Housewife, includes a recipe for a sauce very close to these early ketchups, based on mushrooms and anchovies. It's one of the earliest documented written recipes using this exact word in the English culinary tradition. In other words, the first English ketchups were essentially fish or mushroom sauces, trying to imitate the depth of flavor of the Asian original using local ingredients. Not a single tomato within 1,000 miles of this recipe. For nearly the entire 18th century, the word ketchup in England, and later in Britain's North American colonies, didn't mean one specific sauce. It meant an entire category, thick, rich, long-lasting sauces made from fermented or boiled-down ingredients, primarily mushrooms, nuts, anchovies, oysters, even lemons and grapes. Anchovy ketchup stayed especially popular in Britain and the colonies for decades. They were direct descendants of the same logic as the original Asian fish brine, small fish preserved in salt and spices over a long time, yielding a concentrated, salty, umami-rich sauce added to meats, stews, and soups by the drop, much like modern Worcestershire sauce. Worcestershire sauce itself, created in the 1830s in Great Britain, is arguably the closest living relative of those early anchovy ketchups, having survived to the present day almost unchanged. If you've ever tasted Worcestershire sauce and noticed that deep, dark, fermented edge, that's almost exactly the flavor space ketchup occupied 2.5 centuries ago. The tomato enters this story only at the very end of the 18th century, and even then, not as the main character. The first known tomato ketchups in America are recorded in cookbooks and personal notes from roughly the 1790s to 1800s, and even then they were still competing for attention with all the earlier versions. mushroom, nut, fish. In the United States, the tomato was viewed with suspicion for a long time. It belongs to the nightshade family, the same family as poisonous belladonna, and for decades many Americans considered it, if not outright poisonous, then at least unsafe to eat regularly. The first written tomato ketchup recipe in America is generally credited to James Mees, a Philadelphia scholar and food writer who published it in his 1812 book, The New American Domestic Cookery. This early recipe differed substantially from the modern version. It contained no sugar at all, was much thinner and more sour, and resembled a sharp tomato sauce rather than the thick, sweet ketchup we know today. The shift from this sour, unsweetened tomato sauce to the familiar version, thick, sweet, with a pronounced vinegar and spice flavor, happened gradually over the course of the 19th century and was driven primarily by one practical challenge: preservation. Before reliable canning methods existed, homemade tomato ketchup spoiled quickly and often harbored harmful bacteria. Manufacturers experimented with various preservatives, including sodium benzoate and other chemical additives, which sparked serious public debate over food safety in the United States in the late 19th century. It's at this point in the story that a man appears whose name is, today, practically synonymous with the word ketchup in the United States. Henry J. Heinz began commercially producing tomato ketchup in 1876. His key decision wasn't a marketing gimmick, but a real change to the recipe itself. He significantly increased the sugar and vinegar content, which simultaneously improved the taste for the American consumer and raised the product's acidity and preservation properties, reducing the need for chemical preservatives. This mattered for more than just flavor. In the early 1900s, amid widespread public anxiety over dangerous food additives, anxiety that eventually led to the passage of the U.S. Federal Pure Food and Drug Act of 1906, Heinz publicly marketed his ketchup as free of sodium benzoate and other controversial preservatives, relying instead on natural preservation through sugar and acidity. It was a combination that proved to be a winner both commercially and from a regulatory standpoint, and that formula, high sugar, pronounced vinegar acidity, tomato as the base, became the standard that virtually every other ketchup manufacturer in the United States would go on to copy. By the mid-20th century, this version, sweet, thick, tomato-based, had so thoroughly monopolized the word ketchup in American English that the mushroom, nut, and fish ketchups of the previous 2 centuries had all but vanished from cultural memory. The word survived. Almost everything else changed. Modern American ketchup, the one sitting in your fridge right now, contains not a single gram of fish and has no connection to the original recipe except the word. It's tomatoes, sugar, vinegar, salt, and spices. Full stop. But the direct linguistic and conceptual line connecting that bottle to the fermented fish brine of Southeast Asia hasn't disappeared. It's simply split into 2 separate products that now live on opposite sides of the world under very different names. One path led to the sauce in your ketchup bottle. The other led to nuoc mam in Vietnamese cooking and nam pla in Thai, products still made today almost exactly as they were 300 years ago: small fish, salt, long fermentation. This isn't a coincidental similarity in names. These are 2 branches of the same historical river, split apart centuries ago and never crossing again. Linguists and food historians generally agree. This is one of the cleanest examples of a word making a complete journey around the world, changing shape, taste, and composition, almost beyond recognition, and still remaining the same word. This isn't a story about being deceived. No one is hiding the fact that there's no fish in ketchup, and no one should, because modern ketchup is honestly exactly what it claims to be: tomato sauce. It's a story about how deeply food travels through languages, trade routes, and centuries, and how little of that journey usually remains visible in the final product. The word ketchup passed through at least 3 languages, 2 continents, and 4 major ingredient bases before settling into the form you recognize, which means that every time you pick up a bottle of ketchup, you're holding more than just a sauce. You're holding the end result of a 300-year game of telephone that started with a barrel of fermented fish on the shores of Southeast Asia. The ketchup you eat today is safe, tasty, and has nothing to do with fish. But the word on the label is a fossil trace of one of the longest, least-known food journeys in history. Most people live their whole lives without ever asking why the sauce on their fries has a name that sounds so distinctly un-English. Now you know the answer. If this video changed the way you'll look at the ketchup bottle on your own table, hit like. It's the single biggest thing that helps this channel reach more people. And tell me in the comments, which word in your fridge do you think might have just as strange a history? I read every comment.